Welcome everybody. I'm Stephen Neville, CEO of BugHerd and your host for today. Today I'm absolutely thrilled to have Jules Love here, CEO of Spark, a consultancy that helps creative and marketing teams adapt to a world with AI, which is obviously a very hot topic for all of us these days. We're here to have a deep dive into how to implement and leverage generative AI in agencies. So we're going to cover what use cases are for AI across your creative workflow, how agencies are using AI today, what creative work might look like in the future, practical things you need to think about in terms of data privacy and IP, and also really how you can get started. And that's obviously one of the big blockers for people. Jules, welcome. Would you love to give? I'd love a quick summary, I guess, on yourself and Spark.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I started out my career as a management consultant at Accenture, where I was for about 9 years before I set up my own film and photography agency, where I worked with some of the biggest advertising and design agencies in London, shooting for global clients like Canon, Sony, Unilever, Four Seasons, and then set up my own design agency, in fact, and just as the generative AI boom was kicking off in 2022. So I got on top of that wave, studied generative AI at MIT, and then started finding that other agencies were beginning to ask us for advice on how to get their heads around generative AI. So we set up Spark at the beginning of this year to help train and support other creative and marketing teams on the journey with generative AI.
Excellent. What was your MIT study like?
So it was a remote learning program over the course of about 6 weeks earlier this year with 2 MIT professors and a bunch of their assistants taking us through a lot of technical stuff, but also a lot of great stuff around ethics, intellectual property, how this is going to change society and all that sort of stuff. So really valuable course.
Yeah, great. It sounds fascinating. Before we begin, a couple of things, just accents for our American friends. I have the Australian accent and Jules has the English accent. I know that gets a bit confusing for people, but quick note on housekeeping. We have a QA session open, the QA is open throughout the chat, so feel free to chuck questions in there and we will get to them as we go. We've also allocated some time, 5 or so minutes at the end of the discussion for anything that we don't get to, and we'll come back to those. So a lot to talk about today, so let's dive straight in. So Jules, how is AI changing landscape, you think, for kind of creative and marketing agencies today?
Yeah, so the truth is AI has been around for a while and been in use by marketing and agency teams for a bit now. But previously that was predictive AI, or what people now are calling traditional AI, which seems a bit crazy because it's still pretty new. And that's the kind of AI that you've seen helping optimize campaigns, for example, or recommend the next best offer to a customer, like you do when you're shopping on Amazon or whatever. So the new generative AI tools that kind of burst onto the scene in 2022 are different, though, because they actually create new material. And it's the first time we've had a technology that's been able to do that. And they simulate the kind of things that previously we thought only humans could do. And so because they can write and create pictures and create video, the creative sector and marketing teams, we're both the first to jump on and embrace these tools, but we're also the first industry to get disrupted by them.
Yep. And so I guess like in a practical sense, like where do you see agencies are using it in their workflows today?
Yeah, so I think the thing with these tools is people jump to the conclusion that, because these things can write words and they can create pictures, that I should use them to write my copy and generate my artwork. And the reality is that for final copy and final pictures that actually go out as in campaigns or go out to consumers or customers, they're probably not quite there yet. Where they're actually most useful is all the pieces of the creative process that lead up to that point. So where we see them being used really well is right at the start with research. So they're fantastic at summarizing large amounts of data. So interview transcripts or focus group transcripts, for example, or market research reports, or even competitor websites. They're brilliant at supporting strategy creation. So they're wonderful for ideation, for developing customer personas that you can interrogate, for testing your propositions and helping refine and improve what you're doing. And then as you get into the sort of creative execution side, they're great for concepting, whether it's UI, visuals, storyboards for films or prototypes for apps. They're wonderful at bringing those things to life. And then finally, there are some brands that are starting to use them in final artwork, final assets that are going out in campaigns. And we've seen campaigns from Absolute Vodka and McDonald's and others where they're actually using generative AI in the actual communication that's going out. So yeah, I think we want to open our imaginations a little bit to the kind of tasks you can use these things for.
Yeah, and how do you see that changing? So it's today, you say, and how do you see that changing over the into the future? I'm always reminded of a Steve Jobs quote, that people overestimate the amount of change in 5 years and underestimate the amount of change in 10. So if you take that kind of 5 to 10 year horizon, like what do you foresee?
Well, I can only see that these tools are going to become more and more important in the way that we work and just in society in general. And I think the last time we had a general use technology like AI, that was probably the internet 30 years ago when that went mainstream. And if we think about the impact that the internet has had on business and society, it's been utterly profound. And the way that we use those tools is totally different. Back in the 90s, we were using big chunky desktop computers. Then it became laptops in the 2000s. Then it became phones in the 2010s. And now you can talk to an Alexa speaker, or you've got a smartwatch on your wrist. So, the way we access AI is going to change. And in fact, we just heard that Johnny Ive is working with OpenAI on a new device, an AI device. And I think also it's going to change society, and it's going to change business. It's going to change people's expectations of what is possible. So just like with the internet and the introduction of e-commerce and online shopping, it meant we could buy anything at any time, and Amazon started delivering things the next day or sometimes even the same day, and you could use things for a month and then return them for free. All stuff that in the 90s would have sounded crazy and is perfectly normal today. I think AI is going to change customers' expectations of the businesses that they work with, and it will change society's expectation of what's normal.
I'm actually my observation on that as well is it took companies a lot longer to embrace the internet as it has for what we've seen with the kind of introduction of AI in a much shorter period of time. In practical terms for agencies, are there some real world examples of where agencies are using AI in their workflows today that you think are very useful?
Yeah, so a great example is the Absolute Vodka campaign that I mentioned previously. So Pernod Ricard are a big drinks company based here in Europe, and Absolute Vodka, one of their prestige brands that I'm sure everyone's aware of, they ran a campaign in the lead up to Christmas in the US last year, and they researched 300 locations across the United States that they wanted to activate Absolute Vodka in. And they used ChatGPT to help them do the research on those locations and find either a color or a flavor that had some relevance to that place. And then they worked with ChatGPT and their mixologists to come up with 300 different cocktail recipes, one for each location, that included that color or that flavor in the recipe. And then they used Midjourney, the image generation tool, to create posters of those cocktails. And then they trained bar staff in all of those locations to make their signature cocktail, put the posters on the wall, ran some geo-targeted social media ads featuring the cocktail pictures, and they had the second highest engagement rate of any campaign they've ever run. And they put the whole thing together in 4 weeks. So that's the kind of thing that generative AI unlocks that just wouldn't have been cost effective or feasible before. The lead time would have been enormous. The budget to create 300 custom illustrations would have meant it probably wasn't worthwhile. And that's how I like to help people think about generative AI. It's not really about doing existing stuff quicker. It's about the new things it unlocks that it allows you to do that were just not realistic or feasible before.
Yeah, excellent. So do you think of AI as replacing roles in a creative field or as enhancing human capabilities?
It's interesting. When we talk to agency leaders, the first thing they're interested in is efficiency. Like, how does this stuff save me money? How does it help me get stuff done more quickly? And the challenge with that approach is you end up in a race to the bottom, right? For a few months or perhaps a year, you can make more margin on a job because you actually spent fewer days on creating that output for that client. But everybody else is going to catch up, and then prices are going to drop, right? Because there'll be a lot of price competition. Where the where the space to play with generative AI is by creating new services and delivering more for your clients. And that is something that will keep everybody busy. And I think learning to master these tools, understanding how they work together, and understanding the new things you can do with them, just like we saw with that Absolute campaign, is something where everyone can play. There will be more work than we know how to handle, because we will be able to create campaigns and other way and brands that engage customers even more strongly and in ever more interesting ways.
And I'm reminded of my background is I spent a lot of time in media as well, and one of the most media these days, or certainly the direction that media is heading, is to be bought programmatically. And so there's a lot of you touched on earlier, there's a lot of kind of data that goes into the buying, but the big bottleneck of that is often you can't really do, or you were not able previously to do creative at scale in the same way that you can kind of buy a programmatic media at scale. And I think I see that as a very big opportunity, I guess, to kind of fill that gap, so you can run kind of more targeted creatives at much greater scale as an opportunity. But I guess, what strategies can agencies use to make sure that their teams are exploring these ideas and being trained in the tools to be able to move forward, so they're not being I guess kind of stuck today and thinking about the future?
Yeah, great question. So I think that these tools can mislead people because you interact with them in plain language, in just plain English. People assume they're easy to use. And the reality is that to get good results out of them, you do actually have to know what you're doing, and you have to treat English almost like a programming language and really structure your problem, structure the way you want the language model or the image model to give its output. And then you get control over the chaos, and you get great results that can really help move your thinking forwards if you're in a strategic role, or help move your concept forward if you're in a creative role, or even help you deliver the work that you're doing. And that skill takes time to learn. And there's two ways you can do that, or two ways that you have to do that, really. One is get some training. There's lots of stuff on YouTube that will help you learn crafting, prompting principles. But a lot of it is generic. A lot of it is telling you how to write 10 LinkedIn posts. And you kind of think, well, I don't write LinkedIn posts at work for work. Like, how can I use it for my work? And that's where you have to experiment. And so it's about helping people have a bit of a culture change and think, every time you come across a new challenge at work or a new thing that you have to do, is think AI first about it. Like, could an AI help me with this? Because 9 times out of 10, the answer is probably yes. It's not going to do it for you, and it's not going to just press a button and it's done, but it will probably help you get to a good answer in less time, or perhaps even a better answer than you would have got on your own.
And so is that enough for, for instance, in our team, for me to pay for access to the tools and get people to explore, or is there more to it than that?
That's certainly the way to start, is give people access to the tools. I think beyond the paid plans of these tools, because then your data is protected and your client's data is protected. And then if you can't get $20 a month or whatever these different tools cost, if you can't get $20 a month of value out of these tools, then you're not using them properly. They are hugely powerful and can really speed up the way that we work.
And what kind of training do you think that can help that as well, can help that adoption and help people? I mean, beyond exploring and YouTube and things, is there anything else about? I mean, obviously your service offers that.
Yeah,
But
so
that wasn't a
so
plug,
here
it
at
was
Spark,
a
we do specific training, especially for creative and marketing teams. I would say the thing with these tools is, they don't come with an instruction manual, right? And they don't tell you how you can use this for your work. It's not like using Photoshop or InDesign or whatever you might be using. These things are, it's like the internet. Somebody gives you the internet and you kind of think, well, what can I use it for? These tools are the same kind of thing. So finding out the use cases in your kind of work, the easiest way to do that is learn from somebody who's done it already. So here at Spark, we run in-depth training classes for leaders, for strategists, and for creatives about which are the right tools, how to get the best out of them, how to link them into your workflow, how to talk to your clients about it, and all that stuff, and really operationalize the way that you work in your business.
Yeah. And you touched on the kind of issues around data privacy and also, I guess, intellectual property. So, what are the risks, or what should agencies be aware of in with regards to data and intellectual property with AI?
Yeah, so I think the number one thing to be aware of is to be on the right plan when you use these tools. For agencies that are just starting out with this stuff, we see a lot of what we call bringing your own AI to work, where people are using their personal ChatGPT login or whatever else they might be using. And that exposes you to a lot of risk, because as with all these online products, if it's free, then you are the product, right? Your data is valuable. So if you want to protect your data and not have it being used to train the model and risking having that made public, then you need to be on the paid tier of these plans. On ChatGPT, that's the Teams account. If you're on Midjourney, it's the Pro or Mega account. They all have their different their different names for these tiers, but you need to be on a paid plan. And then the next thing is you really need to understand, where AI is being used in your workflow. If you're managing a team, you need to understand which steps of the process do we use AI for? Where are the AI generated content in the work that we're creating? So when you hand that work over to your client or put that work out into the market as a campaign, what was AI and what was not AI. And if you're working with freelancers, which lots of agencies do, you need to understand if your freelancers are using AI and that they're informing you of that and abiding by whatever policy you've created.
So is that about setting very clear policies and training for the teams and
100%. Yeah. So we really recommend leadership teams getting clear about how they want to use AI in their team, creating an AI policy that spells that out. We use these tools and these parts of the process, and we don't use them for these, and we use it for these kind of clients, but not for those kind of clients, perhaps. You really need to spell that out, make sure everybody understands it, and educate not just your team, but any freelancers and other suppliers that you work with too.
And I'm interested from, I guess, maybe the perspective that, do you think there is then potentially downward pressure on an agency's ability to charge or rate? So something, so if, again, if there's that idea that it's more efficient, often a client might think, oh, okay, well now, that's an opportunity for me to pay you less. Like, how does an agency manage that conversation?
Yeah, great question. So we have certainly some of the agencies we've worked with have already had that question asked them by their clients, where they've had a major client sit them down and say, how does this stuff make what we do cheaper? And I would say that is a window that we're going through right now. The safe place for agencies to play is about using these tools to create innovative new things. Because if you're relying on these tools to create what you do, if what you're creating isn't much better than what comes out of ChatGPT or what comes out of Midjourney natively, then your client is going to start taking stuff in-house because they can do that. What people at agencies bring is brilliant ideas that are brilliantly executed, right? And AI still can't do that and won't do that for a very long time. So don't use AI as a crutch. Use it to create something new and interesting. And if you got the answer from ChatGPT, it's probably not good enough. You need to build on that and just use it as a foundation to help you cover all the bases, to make sure you haven't forgotten something, to test the idea that you've already come up with. So I think that's how we need to think about these things.
One of the things we spoke about previously, which I think is very interesting in that is, so my view is domain knowledge is incredibly important in your ability to assess the kind of outcome of these tools. And so I'm interested in, so for instance, yourself as a photographer, you will get a much better visual outcome from Midjourney than I would be able to do, because you can assess it differently. I guess I'm interested in the future, how you see that when we are training young people coming into the agencies, coming into the industry, if there's less kind of doing of that work, how we kind of bridge that gap between, making sure that they get the domain knowledge necessary to kind of understand, the outcomes effectively, because you learn through doing in a lot of ways. Or is it maybe that you're just learning a different set of skills today than what we did in various forms?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the truth is, I don't think anyone's really figured this out yet. So you're right in that to get the best out of these tools, you kind of need to be an expert at that task already. Firstly, because then you know what kind of prompts or questions to ask of the tool. But secondly, you need to be an expert to evaluate whether what you get back is any good or not.
Yep.
The other thing these tools do is kind of elevate the average skill level. So they allow someone who's not terribly competent to become at least competent, right? And so they level up teams too. But you're right, that pathway of how do you develop domain expertise when we're using AI to generate a lot of the concepting and thinking for us. I think that comes to that point that I mentioned before about don't let AI become too much of a crutch. Don't let it make you lazy. It's there to assist you, but it's not there to do all the work for you. And if you're letting it do all the work for you, you won't learn. Your outcomes won't be any better than what your client could do on their own anyway. So you're not really adding any value. And I think that's the route that we need to think about these things on.
And so we've used, the generic term tools a few times, and you've touched on, so there's a question here, you've touched on ChatGPT, but more specifically, what are the kind of broader set of tools, programs available to agencies?
Yeah, there's a vast amount out there. The truth is there are really only sort of 4 main language models out there and 3 main image models out there. And every other tool that you see is kind of built on the top of one of those other ones. But tools that are built on the top of those language models, there are literally thousands of them. And a good place to start for that is a website called There's an AI for That. And you can ask it if there is an AI for that. You can type in what you're trying to do, and it has a massive database of all the AI tools available. But as a bit of a shortcut to the ones that certainly we find useful and we find a lot of agencies using, then on the research side, then Perplexity is a very powerful tool that kind of combines the best of a search engine like Google with the power of a language model like ChatGPT. And it gives you sources, so it references where it got the data from, so you can be sure it's not hallucinating. We also really like Google's latest Notebook LM that has been around for a while, but hit the news in the last couple of weeks because it can also speak about documents. It kind of can create almost a podcast about what you're trying to research. But actually, the most valuable thing we find is to be able to interrogate interview transcripts and things like that. Then moving on to kind of on the image side, Midjourney is king of the hill still, just because it's so controllable if you're using it straight out of the box. And then if you're training your own model on your own image data, then Stable Diffusion 3 by Stability AI is still the kind of go-to if you're actually creating custom models that are trained on your own brand assets and you want to be able to create more of that kind of thing. And on the video side, Runway is a great tool that allows you to do text to video or even or image to video. And actually, that's what we find most useful. So one workflow might be creating a concept in ChatGPT or Claude, for example, then creating imagery in Midjourney to reflect that concept, and then animating those images using Runway to create a concept for what the film you're creating could look like, for example.
Yeah, very interesting. You touched on the kind of training your own models. Can you talk about that a little bit more? Because it's certainly beyond the scope of the very beginner, I imagine. Is how accessible is that, and where would someone start?
Yeah, sure. So So there are open models and closed models when it comes to creating images. So Midjourney is a very well-known one, but it's a closed model. The only way you can access the Midjourney model is through the Midjourney website. And whilst it gives you an awful lot of control, you can't train it on your own set of data. You can give it an image reference or a style reference, and it approximates those things. But using other tools, you can actually create something that truly reflects your own brand. So Stable Diffusion is an open source model, which you can then you can train it on a data set. So if you have an existing set of brand assets, you have photographs or videos or illustrations that use the colors and styles and ways that you like to use things, you can actually create a data set, train the model on your data set, and then it will be able to create very similar images in the same scope of what you're doing. So that's a very powerful way to build things. It does require a bit more technical expertise, but is within the realms of most brands to be able to do that. And in fact, that's what some of the larger networked agencies are doing with their clients now.
Yep. And so that, I guess, thinking through that, you would think about that on a per client basis. So, so you're training the model, and I imagine that's true for not with Stable Diffusion, but there are text-based models that you can do similar things for to train on kind of voice and brand as well. And
that's right. So Meta have a bunch of open source models under the name of Llama. So text models these are that you could train on your brand copy, for example. And for a lot of brands, what holds them back from using AI, especially in the final artwork and final copy that goes out, is concern around copyright and IP infringement. And this is a way that you can ensure that it's only been trained on your own data and you're not infringing anybody else's IP by using these tools.
No, it's interesting. I guess potential roadblocks or challenges you see, or people, you through your training, people are asking you about when it comes to implementing AI into their agencies?
Yeah, I think first of all, there's certainly a bit of fear out there, especially amongst the more creative sort of end of the spectrum in agencies. And I think a sense that these take away the craft and take away the fun of what people do. And there is some education to go through there, because what's driving that fear is the hype around these tools, the fact that they're going to replace what we do. And they simply don't. They are simply not good enough, quite frankly. They help us do stuff, but they're never going to do anything as good as you are. So it's actually popping that hype bubble, understanding what these tools really do, and then getting over that fear curve and realizing that actually the future is quite optimistic. These tools allow you to do cool new things that were really hard before. So that's one thing. I think the second thing then is that lack of imagination about what you can really use this stuff for. And you need to get under the hood and really play with these things to understand what you can do with them. And you need to look at your existing workflow and just say, well, what if we used AI to help us with that bit? Or what if we used AI to help us with that bit? And dig in. And you'll start to find great new ways that you can use these things, not just to speed up what you do, but actually to create things better than you used to do them before, and to create things that are different from the way that you did them before. So I think that's another thing, like spending the time to actually think about this stuff and what you can use it for. And then the third thing that holds people back is they're concerned about how to talk about it with their clients. So for agencies, sometimes they're concerned about the impact it might have on fees, like we talked about a moment ago. And so they don't really want to bring it up. They don't want to be terribly transparent about how they're using AI. And for brands, there's a nervousness around the IP of these things. And are they exposing themselves legally by using it? So I think those are the three biggest hurdles we see.
And I guess to overcome those, is just process of having the open conversation. And because I certainly, if I can imagine having that conversation, depending on the client, legal and compliance could, get in the way pretty quickly with some of this. So are we seeing that the clients are being more open to it, or is that still an area of contention at the moment?
I think more and more clients are starting to become open to it. So we've already seen, we've discussed the Absolute Vodka campaign. We've seen generative AI video adverts going out from McDonald's now. So brands are starting to get their heads around this stuff and being comfortable with it. I think brands that are in highly regulated industries, like financial services, for example, are going to be inherently more cautious with this stuff. But I think that in a couple of years' time, everybody will be wondering what the fuss was all about, because everyone will be using these tools, and we probably won't even be calling them AI anymore. They'll just be that feature in Photoshop or InDesign or whatever tool that we're using, right?
One question I didn't get to earlier. So we touched on freelancers. What issues can you see arise with freelancers using AI if you're unaware of, going back to the policy stuff you touched on?
Yeah, so I think at the moment what we're seeing is some brands are quite cautious about using AI, and they might say, we're very happy to have AI used in a sort of ideation process or in a prototyping phase, but we're definitely not having any AI content actually go out as part of a campaign, for example, in anything that's customer facing. If you're working with a freelance team and they're supplying you with copy or artwork or other assets that you're using to build that campaign for your client, for example, how do you know if you're able to keep to what you promised to your client? How do you know if there's AI generated assets in what you're handing over to your client? So that's why you need to be aware of what your freelancers are up to. The challenge with that is that typically freelancers charge by the day, or we ask them to charge by the day. And so they can be reluctant to admit they're using AI because the immediate response is, oh, it obviously didn't take you very long. It didn't take you the 3 days for the job. You probably did it in 1. So there's a reluctance. So it forces us to change the pricing model and say, okay, well, actually, we should pay people based on outputs, not on time spent. So I think, and at a bigger level, agencies working with clients are going to find the same thing. A lot of agencies still largely work on a kind of time and materials basis where, if it takes 10 days of a senior designer and 10 days of a strategist and this, that, and the other, then, that's how they calculate how much they should charge a client. But AI breaks that model. And so you have to start charging based on output. How much value are you actually creating for your client, and put a price on that.
Not always an easy discussion.
True. Easier said than done.
That one in my experience. I'm conscious of time, and I'd love people to, if you have QA questions, throw them into the QA as well. But what are 3 things, just really super practical, that people can do today to move forward, so they can get off this call and go in, and it's a bit late for some people, but can go in and and begin to implement tomorrow? Like, where is the absolute starting point?
Number one thing is get yourself some training. These tools are not easy to use, or not easy to get good quality, professional quality content out of. So invest in some training yourself up, or training your team up on how to use these tools properly. Number 1 thing. Number 2 thing is for teams to understand where they want to use AI in their processes. Think about things where you can use AI, experiment with it, and give yourself a bit of time to see, what if we used AI first on that part of our process? What about on this part of our process? And then the third thing that I really would like people to take away from this is to be thinking about the future. And remember that the AI tools we have today are the worst they are ever going to be. These tools are getting better and better all the time, and people are investing more money in improving these tools than has ever been spent on any other technical endeavor ever undertaken. So they are going to improve very fast. So don't plan for what the tools can do today. Plan for what they might be able to do 2 years from now, 3 years from now, where they are truly going to be very, very powerful forces in creativity, in strategy, and all of the other things that we do.
Great. I'm interested also just in, you touched on a bit earlier, but in the kind of prompt, learning how to use prompts properly, because that seems to me, in my experience, my own experience, and in the experience, I guess, in the team, that some people have, there's obviously expertise. You can go into whole courses of study in how to become, and it's a job, prompt engineering itself. Like, how does someone get better at that? Because obviously it's so important to understand in order to get the best outcome from these tools.
Yeah, great question. So the way I like to explain how to prompt well is, if you go on YouTube or look online, you'll find all sorts of recipes to say a prompt needs to include this, that, this, that, this, that. But actually, you can kind of work out how to prompt simply by treating the AI as if it were an intern on its very first day at work. So imagine you've got a super bright 18-year-old who's just finished school and has arrived on their first day in the office. So they're very capable, but they know nothing about you. They know nothing about your business. They know nothing about your client, and they don't know how you work and what you want from them. So you have to explain everything. So prompts can be pretty long. So you've got to tell them you've got to tell the model what its job is if you're using one of the language models. You've got to give it all the context it needs to be able to do that job. What client is it working for? What's the context around the problem you're asking it to solve? You've then got to explain the task you want it to do and break that task down into steps, maybe so that it doesn't have to jump all the way to the final answer. It can think its way through step by step. And then you've got to give it some examples, like what does good look like? What kind of format should the output be? And then finally, you want to say how you want to receive that. Do you want it as a list of bullet points? Do you want it as a table? You can give all of these answers. You can even ask the AI to ask you questions to clarify what you want. So perhaps adding on to the end of a prompt, ask me 3 questions that will improve your answer is actually a great way to help you build up your prompt, because or your prompting skills, because you start to understand what these models need to be able to give you detailed, useful, relevant responses.
So yeah, like everything else, I guess it's not a shortcut in that sense. You need to do the preparation in order to get the best outcome.
Yeah, it's the old, garbage in, garbage out, right? If you ask a very simple question, you'll get a very simple answer. If you ask a very detailed, structured question, you'll get a useful answer. So I highly recommend actually keeping prompt libraries, and you might have heard that term used. Don't just type your prompt straight into the chat window. Actually write it out in a Google Doc or something first. And then you've got it saved for another time, because you'll reuse prompts a lot, especially if you're writing quite detailed ones. And you can also then share them with your team.
Yeah, so is that a thing as an organization to begin to build shareable prompt libraries for an agency to say, okay, for Midjourney, for instance, this is how we get the best. This is what good prompting looks like, and for ChatGPT or Llama, that these are the types of prompts where we get the best outcomes. Is that a good strategy?
100%. Yeah, so Midjourney, for example, every image that you generate that ends up actually being used, make sure you store the prompt for that, because you're going to need to be able to recreate other images like that for that particular brand or that particular client in the future. And having the detail of those prompts makes it replicable. The other thing to think about, of course, is, if you don't keep a prompt library, all that knowledge is in somebody's head. And what do you do when they move on? If you rely on just a few superstars in your team who have mastered these tools, you've got a very fragile level of knowledge, right? It just takes 1 or 2 people to move on to work in another place, and you've lost a lot of your capability. So prompt libraries are a great way of keeping that.
Okay. So questions. So Jules, just been very interesting. I am interested in time, so we'll probably have a 5-minute Q&A. If anybody we have a couple of questions, which I'll go through now, but if anybody wants to chuck additional questions in the Q&A, please do so now. Jules, first one is just to explain that. What do we mean by a prompt library?
So a prompt library is a very grand sounding word for what's really just a Google Doc, where you store your prompts and what you're trying to achieve, the prompt you used to create it, and whether you got a good output from it or not. Would you recommend somebody else used a similar prompt if they were solving the same problem? And that way you can have shareable knowledge about how to get the best out of these tools.
And so the prompt, even more simply, is the question that you type into, or the request that you make of the AI tool. Excellent. This is a great question. Who generally owns AI projects within an agency? So it feels like it's being bounced around in our team, but no one really tends to own it. However, all team members are using it on their own.
Yeah, so one of the things we advise agencies is you kind of have to put somebody in charge of this stuff, because waiting for AI use to happen organically within your teams is going to be a long and slow journey, very inconsistent, where some people adopt it quickly and others are very reluctant. So we really recommend, make someone the head of your AI initiative, put somebody in charge, and then give them a little bit of space to actually have the time to be effective in that role. Clear out 1 day a week of their diary so that they actually have the time to understand how you want to use AI in different parts of your team, and then helping people achieve that and making sure that it's being used responsibly, that you're using the right kind of licenses, you're protecting yours and your clients' data. They're the person who should lead the charge on writing that AI policy and making sure everybody understands it. They should be the person making sure people are getting the right training to get the best out of these tools. And that way you will actually move forwards. And get AI as a standing agenda item on the leadership team when they get together, so that it's a focus for the agency and you make progress every month.
Yep. I'd love to hear another real world example. You touched on the kind of absolute vodka campaign and some of the McDonald's stuff. Love any other real world examples of where people are using it today successfully?
Yeah, sure. So this summer, Mango is a fashion brand here in Europe. I don't know if you get it over in the US and Australia, but their whole summer campaign was using AI generated imagery, where the clothing was photographed in the studio and the models and the locations were all generated and all put together in using Photoshop as well. So usually these things require a combination of tools in sequence. So traditional photography, then using a model that's been trained on your existing assets to create the character, then using then dressing that character using an AI tool again, and then generating a background using something like Midjourney, and then using Photoshop to put it all together. So Mango is one. Another great one that we've seen is Security Scorecard, who are a cybersecurity company who have, for most people, cybersecurity is not a terribly interesting topic. So how do you make that interesting and accessible to people who are not so technically minded? They worked with their agency to create a comic book. So they created a sort of Flash Gordon style semi-sci-fi kind of comic strip to illustrate the use cases and how their products help companies maintain cybersecurity. And they did that by, they used ChatGPT to help come up with the scripts. They used Midjourney to generate the backgrounds. They used a character AI to create consistent characters that allowed them to view characters from multiple dimensions. And then they did all of the layouts in Figma. And so they now have a sort of repeatable asset that they can use again and again and again. Every time they release a new product or a new use case or enter into a new industry, they can create a new comic strip that kind of illustrates that for them. So that's another great example.
Excellent. This is a very good question. Would you advise us to place an AI policy on our website similar to a privacy policy? And they've seen at least one agency doing this. Is this that feels like a very great idea, I think, because it shows that you're getting in front of the curve to some degree.
Yeah, I think an AI policy is probably an internal document, but an AI statement about how you use AI in your agency that speaks to your clients is a great thing to do. And yes, we've seen agencies do that too. And you want to talk about how the fact that you're using AI ethically, about how you're ensuring that you're protecting people's data and that you're not using it for things that would that you're using it in the right kind of way for positive reasons. I think that's a really good way to do that and reassure clients that you're using AI responsibly in your business.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much for your time today, Jules. It's really great conversation, and thank you for sharing your wealth of expertise on the topic. To everyone else, hope you found the session valuable. Jules, you have, I believe, some training that you're launching to share that's not in person.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. So I think following the webinar, everyone who's registered is going to have a few details that come out. One of the things you're going to get is a little PDF from Spark, my business, which on one side, it'll give you a whole bunch of use cases of where you can use AI in your process and some of the tools that support that. Really handy little cheat sheet for you. And on the back, there's a QR code and a link to sign up for our in-depth half-day online training that we do as an AI activation course, either for individuals or for your team. So if you're interested, do sign up for that, and we'll keep you posted of when that launches.
Excellent. One final question came in just as I was asking that was, should there be a disclaimer for AI-generated content, do you think?
Yeah, well, we're already seeing that, right? So Instagram labels AI-generated content right now. And obviously it's entering, high stakes political season in the US right now with the election coming up, and a lot of concern around deep fakes and other things. So certainly I think in a reporting and a news cycle basis, then I think AI-generated content should certainly be labeled. Going forwards, should it be labeled when it's being created for commercial purposes? Maybe. There's probably no harm in that. I think it's something that, soon it's a temporary phase that we're going through. I think in France, they have a law for beauty adverts that have to say if they've been photoshopped, for example, to change the features of the face or the skin, but so that people understand that these aren't realistic depictions of beauty. And maybe we need something like that with AI.
Yeah. And certainly from the, going back to what you said earlier, from the agency's perspective, best to be transparent about that with your client if you are making AI-generated content.
100%.
Excellent. Well, thanks very much, Jules. Last kind of bit of housekeeping for people. You receive a recording of this session for anybody who wants to kind of go back through it. When you leave the webinar, you'll be asked there'll be a quick survey. We would love you to kind of fill in on whether you found this content valuable. Also, if you'd like to contact Jules or BugHerd ourselves, didn't talk about us, but we are a feedback tool, and that's why we love feedback. We want to get better at this. Jules and everyone on the call, thank you very much for your time today. Short and sweet, but have a great day or evening for wherever you are in the world. It's currently 6:45 a.m. here, so we're just starting. But Jules, again, thanks very much, and goodbye, everybody.
Thanks, Steve. Goodbye.